quote from your upcoming book. Again, the book is called No Way Out, Precarious Living in the Shadows of Drug Dealing and Poverty and Drug Dealing. Let me get to this quote. I want to ask you about this. I'm going to throw it to the panel as well. The quote starts out with, this is in your conclusion. Tensions rise when residents attempt to conform to both internal and external expectations. When policies fail to take local dynamics into account, they set people up for failure. For those with few legal ways of earning a living, the opportunities offered by the underground economy are inescapable. And basically what you're going to, I have to imagine, is that some of the dynamics that we're facing is that if you're locking people out of good schools or good jobs or an opportunity to do things the right way, it's kind of hard to ask them, why are you doing things the wrong way?
I mean, I think people are not going to starve and, and suffer because it's convenient for people who live on the outside of these communities. I think people who live in these neighborhoods understand what the job situation is, the inadequacy of the schools in a lot of these spaces. And these are families. People, it may not be the type of family that, that's a mom and a dad and 3 kids, but it's a family nonetheless. And I think, a draw is to alleviate suffering. I'm not condoning the drug trade. I'm not condoning the underground economy, but I do think that there are kids who have taken systematic steps to try to alleviate the poverty that they're living in a lot of these socially isolated, segregated communities. And I think that's at a root of the problem. So yes, having economic access, fixing our schools with smaller class sizes, making sure their parents have livable wages, those are all important things that people in these communities understand. And people on the outside are more concerned with, this sort of perception of these kids versus their daily realities. And their daily realities is that it's horrible to live in poverty. I grew up in poverty. It sucks. There's nothing about poverty that I want to return to. But I also recognize that it's just deprivation of opportunities. So how do we tie those opportunities to the people who live there?
Okay, but let me push back. Blaine, I'm going to start with you on this. Black people went through slavery. Black people went through Reconstruction. Black people went through the Klan. Black people went through Jim Crow. And within basically a generation, we've gone from people growing up in Jim Crow to a baby boomer being the first African-American president of the United States. So at the same time that we see all these obstacles, we also see this long legacy of perseverance. So where's the disconnect now to get us past this new, basically, group of obstacles and challenges that we're supposed to bridge over to get to the next step?
I think that where there's struggle, you tend to, it's a unifying factor, unifying force. I think after the 70s and into the 80s, I think our community fell asleep at the wheel and we got comfortable. And one of the things I say to all my employees is I'm never comfortable. I'm always uncomfortable, because uncomfortable brings about wanting more. And I think we got comfortable with our station, with our status, and we didn't strive for more. I understand that there are certain things put in place. I am completely cognizant of that. But I can't stress it enough on this panel or to whoever I speak to. It's all about education, Lenny. If we can properly educate our youth, then we can make the money. So when it boils down to it, it's about money. We don't have the money, so we don't have the power to influence the change.
We have an awful lot of spending power in African-American culture. We have over $1 trillion worth of spending power. So one could make the argument that it's not about money. It might be about priorities. It might be about cohesion. Malcolm, when it comes to those types of things, and taking what we have right now and getting better results, when we saw better results, when we had a lot less from a materialistic standpoint, is it about brokering and changing and shifting, if you will, how we may vote, how we may act, how we may get involved in activism? What is it that we have to recalibrate to get those results?
Well, I think if there's a very instructive book that's out, not that I'm advocating an absolute, this is a template, but there's a book called The Jewish Phenomenon. And this might be controversial, but I have to say it. And what the book explores is how the Jewish community has been such a thriving entity in so many places in this country. And when you look at the underlying text of that, it's because of the cultural infrastructure that they've built within their community. When you look at Pittsburgh, look at Squirrel Hill, look at the schools there. Look at, when we were young, we were going to play basketball, and my classmates were going to Hebrew school. Why? Because they were developing the cultural ideology and the sense of group identity that enables us to use our greatest replenishable resource, which is our God-given talent and our intellect. Those are the real values that you have. Because if you give somebody resources like we have in terms of that trillion, you know, that the spending power that we have, but we don't have the right mindset culturally and individually, we will simply squander that. And as was pointed out earlier, that money won't even circulate one time in our group. I wonder how many times the dollar circulates in Squirrel Hill. I don't know. But I can guarantee you that a big part of the starting place for that community and other communities around the world who have thrived is to develop the mindset that allows people to use whatever they're given for the benefit of themselves and their group.
We keep talking about education, but we seem to be the ones where our boys drop out of school the fastest. We're locked into public schools the most. Mm-hmm. We don't get a chance to get into college as much. And when we do, we're the ones that drop out. I'm a college dropout. I went back after a decade. You know my story. Mm-hmm. So with that said, what types of things do we need to put into place to change those statistics? What types of things specific to education, let's say, do we need to change to be able to keep our black boys in school so that they can actually become real men?
I think at every point in American history when this country was suffering, we implemented some type of important program. So when it was the Great Depression, we did the New Deal. Mm-hmm. World War II, we did housing, you know, the GI Bill, the Civil Rights Movement, voting, housing, desegregation. Mm-hmm. And so saying this all to say, there needs to be a plan put in place. That Great Recession dislocated so many people. There has to be a social plan that's in line with American history when people were suffering.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. And this is why I don't agree with it. I think that we have to basically look ourselves in the mirror, and we have to do it on a grassroots level, each one of us as men in our families, because if we look for a handout, we're going to be looking for a long time. It's not going to happen.
But a plan's not a handout, is it?
I don't understand how a plan revolving around social justice could ever be considered a handout. I don't see how the affirmative action created the largest black middle class. I'm pretty sure everyone at this table has been effective, benefited from it. Mm-hmm. It had nothing to do with mentality. It had nothing to do with a handout. It had to do with making sure, taking affirmative action to make sure you're not going to be discriminated against in the workplace. All I'm saying is that at every point when we've seen disproportionate numbers of the American population suffering, we did some type of social program to say that, you know, whether it's funding education, whether it's smaller class sizes, whether it's making sure people have economic opportunities, whether it was putting people back to work. Those were American programs. And if it is described as something being a handout, then thank you. Give me my handout. Because I think I'd rather have a handout than see people suffering, kids dying in the street, people can't afford housing, people can't afford to live.
We have to stop relying on other people. We have to do this in our community.
We have bled blood, sweat, and tears building this country. It's not a reliance on us. It is an entitlement that we should have as Americans to be treated like American citizens.
And who's going to give that to us?
Who's going to give it to us? I'm not asking anybody to give it to us. I'm asking to recognize when a system is unfair, it makes the system illegitimate.
That, but yet we're not moving forward. We need to take control.
Let me jump in here on this, because I think there's something to be said also about how we change what we do. I mean, we're locked into some policies that maybe we shouldn't be locked into. We're locked into some leaders that perhaps we shouldn't be locked into. We're going to talk about that next. How do we change that dynamic as well so that we can resolve the types of things that we're seeing that keep us locked into place? We're going to continue this great conversation here on the Pittsburgh Cable News Channel.